All right, so here we are. Another episode of Chairmen of the Boards. I believe this is episode number 13, but we're not recording on a Friday, so we're all good there. I'm happy about that. Today, I think we're going to chat about kind of how we all got into building rigs, building pedals, origin stories. You guys happy with that one?
Yeah,
I like it.
I always love if I'm into a podcast or if I'm into a series or something, I love hearing the story of how people I'm listening to, got into where they're at and how they got to where they are. By no means saying that we have arrived or our stories or anything, all that, over the top incredible. But I think I would love to hear your guys' stories. I know that, how you got to where you are today. And I'm excited to actually hear some of your guys' beginnings. And so I figured it'd be cool to just ask the first question if I was the interviewee. I know last episode we talked about a guy named Scott. Maybe today it could be a guy named Adam. And
Hello, Adam.
Yes, Adam's asking the questions today. So I was just curious, when did you guys first get into, let's say, music? When did you understand that music would actually be a significant part of your life? I'll throw it to you first, Mason. When was this a realization for you?
When did and when we talk about music, just like when
playing
we were
guitar,
playing guitar,
maybe piano, whatever it was. When did it begin?
Yeah, I started playing, I did play piano first, and I started playing piano when I was, I think in third grade. And,
wow.
So I started playing piano in third grade. I was really into R&B piano, but all the piano teachers where I lived, they were all like classical pianists. And so I remember, just kind of give you an idea of sort of the age difference here between us is I was really into the R&B group Boys to Men, which maybe you guys have heard of.
Why wouldn't you be?
Yeah, and and I had bought the sheet music to Boys to Men 2, and I wanted to learn how to play some of the piano parts. But like if you're taking it to a piano teacher that's like used to playing like Rachmaninoff and Beethoven, to hear their interpretation of like playing R&B music,
oh my gosh,
it's pretty terrible. So I guess like I learned how to play the right notes, but like not with the right feel. I started taking piano lessons, and I also would play in like the school band. I played saxophone in the school band from like third grade to maybe fifth grade, and then I started playing drums in sixth grade, and also started playing guitar maybe like a year later than that, maybe in seventh grade. And I was just really into. I was always really into pop music. I didn't really like, I think I started there. I just like music that was on the radio. I like wanted to be able to play that sort of music. I remember my parents got me a nylon string acoustic as my first instrument, and I think that they were a little bit hesitant to get me on an electric guitar. And
it's the devil's instrument.
Yeah, right. It was, and so I remember I kind of graduated from a nylon acoustic to a steel string acoustic, and then eventually, maybe like a year and a half in, I got a Strat and a Crate amp, solid state.
Awesome.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, the guy that sold me that guitar, his name is James DePrato. He's a great guitar player. He was working at Guitar Center at the time. We're still pals. And he didn't even remember that he sold it to me because we didn't come to know each other as friends until many years later. But he sold me my first electric guitar at Guitar Center in El Cerrito, California.
So when you got your electric, let's like say when you got your Strat and the Crate amp, life is good. When you got those, was it pretty quick, pretty soon after you realized, this is my instrument? Or were you still, maybe into drums, maybe into keys? Like when, because from the outside, it looks like guitar is your thing, to maybe state the obvious, but I could be wrong.
No, I never got in. I kind of dropped off everything else. I remember my parents kind of being bummed, because as parents, you invest money in all of those, all these hobbies. Although I would say that my parents definitely like, you know, they definitely were more interested in me playing piano than I was. My parents like to do this thing, which parents I think often do. They have over guests or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, Mason, won't you play?"
Come play Boys to Men.
Yeah, no, it was always really esoteric stuff. Like as a kid, your musical tastes like are not great. I mean, not that Boys to Men isn't great because they are, but like the way that I learned it, or like I remember like the Mission Impossible 1 had come out. I think it was like 94
So good.
or 95, and I learned how to play the Mission Impossible theme. And so it was just like kids stuff like that. I remember like I wanted to play that. I wanted to play like the Beverly Hills Cop, like little kind of like synthesizer intro, but on piano. Just like stuff you want to play when you're a kid. It's not like necessarily like great musicianship or anything like that. It's just kind of like it's interesting to you when you're a kid.
Yeah.
And the guitar was there was a lot less enthusiasm, let's say, from my folks, but I was really enthusiastic. I got into Stevie Ray Vaughan. I remember I bought my first Tube Screamer. Those were great rites of passage.
Love it, man. And then we'll get to the rest in a sec. But Brian, what about you, man? When did you know? How did you get into music? When did you know it was going to be something that stood the test of time?
I would say I always liked like guitar growing up, and I think I tried getting lessons when I was like 6 or 7, but at this time, like I started playing hockey when I was like 4. Like I started skating and playing sports. Like thank you, because I was from Michigan, so it was like driving in this morning to work, my boss was like, you were playing hockey at 4 years old. I'm like, well, it's like here, like catching a football. Like it's like you have to like catch as soon as possible. But it was the same thing. So like I liked guitar, but I liked hockey a lot more. And I took some lessons here and there, and 90% of the lessons I was just like watching the guy playing because he was a really great player. And good teacher growing up that I was friends with, and I would never learn my stuff because I would just be too mesmerized by his playing. So it kind of back and forth, dropped on and off, and we had I learned a lot of music growing up from being at church, and we had a youth pastor that introduced us to like this competition that a lot of churches will do, and a bunch of my friends were like, we should start a band. And I'm like, guys, I don't know how to play guitar. They're like, but you can. I was like, because I own a guitar doesn't mean I can play a guitar. So like we like,
if only
our drummer like wrote a song and dropped D, and it was like this whole like, okay, so like we were all like learning the song from him, but then I was physically learning how to play the guitar, and I was like playing like all these bar chords, and it was just like I'm a guitarist. So we gelled on that one song for like a good couple years, and like all that basement playing. So I would say it was like 8 or so. I started with like one of those like first stack guitars. Like I think it had a speaker inside the guitar. I'm pretty sure it had a speaker in the guitar. Man. Dude, like it was red, it had a speaker, and I do remember before I could play, this is before even the band, I like wanted to play at church, and they let me like play in the kids ministry, but I couldn't play. So like whenever like we would sound check, I would like strum the strings and they would hear me play. But then when the song would play, I would roll back my volume and like act like I was playing. I don't remember how old I was. Probably like 18 or 19. Probably super young or something. But I did like that for a while and realized how much I enjoyed it. So then I kind of kept moving on and got like a Squire, and then an Epiphone Les Paul, and then a Gibson, and it's down the rabbit hole from there. So,
yeah, love it.
How about you, Grant?
Yeah,
my dad always played acoustic growing up. He was a songwriter. He was in some bands when he was younger, and so I looked up to him. Still look up to him, and I think I started playing when I was 11. So compared to you guys, a late bloomer. And my first guitar was a Samick Strat. one of those amp and guitar combo packs that you get with a little like 8-inch speaker and a little solid state amp.
As God intended.
You guys know it. Yep. And that's a first guitar. And went into lessons, enjoyed it for the most part. And then when I got to high school, I played sax as well, tenor sax, as a grade 7 or 8er, I think. And then guitar came right around the same time. And then I got to school, and there was a jock in school. Not a big fan of jocks because of this story. And this jock, he liked where my locker was. And so when I was away, moved my stuff out of the locker and took the locker as his own so he could be beside his buddy. Fast forward probably 2 weeks later, this jock turns out to be a musician who also was the front man in a band. I'll use the word band lightly. And he found out I played guitar. And he's like, oh, so sorry about the locker. Do you want to come audition for our band? And we ended up becoming awesome friends. The band stayed, like we were great friends all through high school and after. We were never, I will highly stress this, never any good. But we made up for it by our sheer enjoyment of just hanging out and playing music together. And so that was that. And then the band kind of broke up when I moved over to a buddy of mine, the bass player in the band, wanted to move to Australia. I ended up going with them because it sounded like a great time. And then the band was kind of history from there. Hard to run a band from North America and Australia at the same time. Right. Without any budget. So yeah, I kind of got into it because of my dad, and then stayed because of these friends in high school, and just really, I guess I really fell in love with, and was also terrified at the same time of performing live. And that was kind of the exciting thing that really of kept me with it for a little while. But I guess moving on to my next question, I'll start it off. It was a confronting is the best word, realization when I started getting into junction boxes and cables. And like the first thing I still remember was looking up how a 3PDT foot switch worked. And I still remember, for those of you guys that don't know, that's basically the standard foot switch in any overdrive. Like this Benson Boost behind me might have one in it. I actually don't know, but that's what they look like, the foot switch right there.
Mechanical.
They just have that click. You hit them and they have that click, and that's it. That's the sound. I remember Googling how this switch worked. I was like, how do I know which wire goes where? And I was trying to find an orientation marker on Google, which you will know if you know anything about the switch. There isn't one. Brian has one on screen if you're watching on YouTube. And I spent so long researching this, all to find out like I was overcomplicating things. But once I wired up my first true bypass loop, I had this confronting realization that I enjoyed figuring out signal routing and switches, and then onto buffers and onto pedals and all that stuff. I enjoyed that more than I enjoyed playing guitar. And I was a denier. I would not let myself believe that. Like, I have to like guitar more. I'm a guitar player. Like, it's what I love to do. And there was this thing that happened. I was like, I enjoy the mechanics of guitar more than I enjoy playing the instrument. And I still, honestly, to this day, I still kind of wrestle with that a little bit, because guitars, that's the cool thing. That's what you're supposed to like. But I really enjoy the building, the signal routing, the problem solving that being a rig builder and pedal builder offers a lot more than I do playing the instrument. I'm by no means insinuating that you guys have had a similar experience, but I'm curious when the building side came into your guys' lives and what that process kind of looked like. Was it, I was thinking about this a little bit before, was it that maybe you always wanted to be a touring or session musician and it didn't work out and were into building and you found this alternate love, or you really were just taken by the rig building and the pedal building and that world kind of consumed? Or have you found a way to make them work in tandem and here we are today. I'm curious what your guys' stories have been like on that, integrating the building side of things.
I would say mine, it actually all started because I modded a Nova delay for external tap and scroll feature.
Yep.
And I actually have a photo of it if I can share this. It only makes sense to show it. So if you're watching, you'll see it. So I modded this Nova, as you can see it was in my bedroom when I was a teenager. But yeah,
those some real deer antlers back there?
Nope, that's a screenshot of today. Oops. My wife's like, what are you doing? And I screenshot. I was in the podcast. But I did this mod with an external tap switch that I bought from some company that did like, because I didn't know how to wire the tip in the ring or anything at the time. But one side did the banking up and down, and the other side did tap for whatever reason. Because on the Nova, it's a little more difficult to do on the fly. So I just did it, and I loved it, and I freaked my dad out because he like bought that pedal like a week before for me for my birthday, and I already had it like opened up and like pulling it up, the whole everything. He's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Don't freak out, I got this." And I still mod him to this day, but with MIDI. But I think it started with that, and I always wanted to tour because the band I was in, which is funny, I have a similar story for you, like with you, Grant, is I was in a band with my friends growing up, and we were like ages, I think it was like 12 to I was like 17, and the two oldest band members went away to Hillsong, the college, and we're like, well, how are we gonna do this? And like, I guess we're not. So like, we all took a break for a while. They went to school, they graduated, they came back, and we got back together for like a year. Most of us had already started doing our own thing, but in the midst of that, I like did some more MIDI mods. I did some more mods. If I can find it, I started building pedal boards for my friends out of it, like right here. Like this was like mine, like on a piece of wood, power strip, like no power supply. I'm using all of the and I'm definitely daisy chained about 90% of this. The layout, it's all those wonderful.
You got warts, bro.
Dude, so like I had a Eggonator Rebel 30. I thought I needed the channel switching. I never used it. Like everything is pretty much daisy chained together. I had the longest cables. I had all these like pre-made Guitar Center cables, and I started doing them for friends. As you can see here, I did some Georgelles. I actually like made this board out of like wood and wrapped it in hook and loop Velcro. It's basically a pedal train. Let's be honest. All said and done, it was a pedal train. So I started getting intrigued by doing these types of boards. That when we moved to Michigan, I started building guitar cabinets, and I met a gentleman on the way, Jordan Rigg. He built boards for while I was there at the time of some of his own stuff, and helped me start kind of like getting a platform for building more. And I started doing more pedalboard stuff, which, as you can see, a couple of these were solderless cabling. That was my old past. You'll have to forgive me for that. But I just started getting intrigued by doing it, and I don't know if I'm getting ahead of the question.
Oh, dude, man.
But I started like doing it, and it'd be fun to go out and tour and stuff, but like the band was never at that point. Like we weren't going to go out and tour. I did some guitar teching, which was actually a lot of fun, for a band I didn't know much about it back in Michigan, but my parents did. I guess they were a band back in the day called Brownsville Station. They were from Michigan, and I had built 4 massive 412 cabinet cases. I lost a ton of money on it. Like I underquoted him. It was the worst thing ever, but I learned a lot from that. I got to actually go out and do some teching for their like local gigs, which was fun. But I always kind of like had this knack for the behind the scenes stuff, and I've enjoyed it. I like playing. I had that stage fright kind of growing up and stuff with playing in front of people, but I always enjoyed this behind the scenes stuff, which lucky enough I got to keep building rigs through when I worked for an amp company, and then after the amp company I kept going from there.
So you've kind of had a few different kind of companies and avenues along the years and kind of morphed into where you're at today.
Yeah, I tell people my resume is like a Swiss Army knife. I've had a lot of jobs. I've had like 12 or 13 jobs. But everyone's like, wow, that's a lot of jobs. I'm like, yeah, but I've always learned from that experience and moved on. And just because I like to be really well rounded. So I did one job, and then 5 jobs later, they're like, oh, shoot, we need to move this 2-ton, or we got to move this big old, like when I worked for Jackson, we had to move a press brake in. This is in the beginning stages of doing the enclosures. And they're like, well, we have a high-low, but none of us knows how to drive it. And I was like, I know how to drive a forklift. And like, you do? I was like, oh, yeah, I worked for Delta Airlines for 2.5 years, and I did forklift stuff.
Crazy.
So like, I had all these jobs. In the midst of the jobs was still building pedal boards and attempting to build them at the time because it was all solderless. So
yeah. What about you, Mason? How'd you get into the techie side of the music industry? What was the beginnings of that?
Yeah, when I was in high school, it was kind of during the start of like the modding craze to sort of take more common pedestrian effects like tube screamers or blues drivers or things like that and convert them into kind of boutique pedals for those who couldn't afford the boutique pedals of the time, let's say like a full tone or something of that nature, or maybe even toward the end of me being in high school, like exotic effects. You could send out your tube screamer to Analog Man or Robert Keeley, and then they would perform a modification that would sort of convert it into something that resembled either a closer approximation to a vintage version or something that was closer to some of the more boutique options that were around at the time, but were considerably more expensive. And so I remember being into the idea. I as a teenager, I couldn't afford the Analog Man or the Robert Keeley versions, and I remember initially, like, buying like a kit. It wasn't Monty Allen's, although he also offered kind of like DIY kits, but it was something similar to that, where you could sort of convert a TS9 to the 808 specs, and so you change the chip to, JRC, 455.8, and some little changes to the effect. And I remember I had done that myself. And I remember thinking, I had taken some kind of introductory, like soldering and sort of like assembly class, because a part of what a lot of people in my high school would do is they had some vocational tracks that if you wanted to be an auto mechanic or be in the trades, they had some skill classes that you could take. And I remember just wanting to take some, understanding some assembly stuff and soldering and stuff like that. And I also continued that at a community college locally as well. But I just remember being interested in that and I remember when I got out of high school and I was in college, I was like, oh, it'd be cool to learn more about this, and to put up some ads on Craigslist, because Craigslist was really big in the Bay Area where I lived, to just say, hey, I'll mod or repair your pedal or your amplifier, because I'd gotten into working on amplifiers too. You pay for the parts and I'll do the mods or the repairs, and it was just to kind of get some experience. And so, because it was Craigslist and it was, basically like a free offering, I had lots of people that were wanting to basically say, well, copy the Analog Man silver mod or copy the Robert Keeley baked mod. And so there were already sites that kind of had broken down what those were and what changes were being made. And so I did a lot of those types of mods, like basically just copying a Robert Keeley mod or an Analog Man mod to an existing product. And I also got a little bit of experience in amp repair. However, that was kind of curtailed pretty fast because where I was living in college, I guess you had to have like unobstructed entrance and exits from the dormitory rooms, and the amplifiers took up too much space. Because I remember like kind of like, if you can imagine a dormitory that has maybe like a twin size bed that's aligned to either side of the wall, and I just had kind of my side just filled with amplifiers and things like that. They said that was a fire hazard and that they couldn't have it. So I kind of got away from doing amps and just went completely to pedals. And I would buy these kind of like shoe box, or these shoe kind of like plastic holders that you get from like Container Store. And I would, be able to put, maybe 20 or 30 pedals in them, and I could put them underneath my bed. So I'd like take somebody's work order, I'd rubber band it to the pedal, so I knew what they wanted me to do, and then I could knock those out. And I remember I did it kind of just for the experience for about maybe 6 or 8 months. And then I just started charging like super nominal, like $20 or $30 to do the mod. Following that, after I had a little bit more experience, but it taught me a lot about just, how to, do rework, how to, kind of practice my soldering. In high school and community college, a lot of that soldering was much larger items. It wasn't like kind of really small components like, small capacitors or resistors or stuff like that. So it taught me a little bit about that, and I, came to understand more about circuits and things of that nature, and, again, how to do things like wiring a 4-pole double throw for a stereo true bypass, or a 3-pole double throw lesson for a mono true bypass, and learn some basics. And then also I had some really good mentors that kind of helped give me more experience. I met somebody through David Tarnowski, who is the founder of ADA, who was the guy that made, famous analog flanger and also a lot of rack gear, who is a local Bay Area guy. He had introduced me to an engineer that really helped kind of elevate my skill level from kind of like more of an assemblyman technician level to a much higher level of understanding of things like buffers and signal paths and all sorts of stuff. And he was really instrumental in helping me do that. And part of the reason why I got into building pedal boards is I had commissioned somebody to build me a pedal board, and it was never really done right. And I thought, I had no plans of doing a pedal board rig, but or offering those services, but I was kind of disappointed with the level of service. And I also felt like, being young at the time, when I had this commission, I think I was maybe 21 years old, and I was playing part-time in kind of top 40 wedding bands while I was in college. And I thought, man, like, I felt like when you were young and when I was younger, and I kind of gave feedback or opinions to this particular guy about how I felt like maybe the plan of the pedal board wasn't executed particularly well. Like, for example, like there was like things that were impedance sensitive, like a treble booster. I remember I had a Keeley Java boost, and it was put after a buffer. And I was like, well, why did you do that? And it was kind of like the guy was upset with me for pointing something out that seemed to be a really obvious oversight. And because I was younger, he's like, well, you don't know what you're talking about. I've done this for, however much time. Like, you don't understand. And it was kind of a really disconcerting experience. And I was like, I could offer these sorts of services. Like, I know how to do assembly. I know, about electronics, and there's nobody in my area that offers this service at all. And so why don't I, kind of offer this in parallel, as I'm, starting to graduate from college and trying to find work in the real world. And, that's kind of how I got into doing this.
And did you ever have, again, in air quotes, a real job after college, or did you go straight into being self-employed? And
no, I in parallel. So when I graduated from college, it was kind of during the really gnarly economic downturn, at least in the United States in the late 2000s. And so when I graduated from college, before I graduated, I had joined this program that takes recent college grads from Ivy League schools and maybe like, at the time kind of like higher tier universities throughout the country, and would place and it would get them an emergency teaching credential and place them in high needs cities. So that's how I ended up at Oakland. And actually, I have a screenshot here that you can see. Here's me right out of college, also doing pedalboards concurrently, and here I am as a teacher with
look at you.
with my class of first graders. And you have no choice when you enter this program. It's through AmeriCorps. It's called Teach for America, and you can essentially, they help offset student loans, but you get placed in whatever school is needed with most teachers, and you take whatever position you get. So you have no say. You just end up there. But it was great. I got to play guitar a lot. We got to do a lot of music, and I did that concurrently for a few years while I was kind of building up my business, because you have to commit to doing a certain amount of years as a teacher as a contingency of that program, so I can fulfilled the few years of service, and then by that time also doing pedal boards, modifications to pedals, repairs, and stuff like that at the same time. Once I was finished with my committed time, then I transitioned full time into doing pedal boards, pedal modifications, and then eventually doing our own pedals as well.
That's awesome.
I was actually going to ask both of you guys this in terms of what it felt like, and maybe Brian, you might be able to start us off. What it felt like when you realized you could do this as a full-time job, pay the bills, make your own schedule. Like, what was that feeling like being in the music industry full-time?
Well, mine abruptly started full-time after I left a admin position from a church I was at. It was a great job. It just wasn't for me. So it was like one of those like, what do we do? So I just started doing full-time, which you would think it's like all, wonderful and everything to be able to have your own schedule and do everything. It actually made things harder. It was more difficult because I was constantly working. We were in this really tiny apartment, and we had an extra room, and we had a 1 year, actually it was a couple years old, and we had one on the way, our son. So like I was always like, whenever I had like time at home that was free, I would be trying to build something, and my wife's like, you have to, gotta set some time, set some work hours. And it was like the mentality of, well, if someone messages me, I have to be able to respond, or if this client reaches out, I have to be able to respond. She's like, yeah, but not at 11 o'clock at night. So it was a big learning experience. Being at the sanctuary, I have a set days and time that I'm here, which is nice. And it's work and home are two different things. But regardless, that time, it was cool to understand how I could prioritize stuff. It was harder because I was in an apartment and people had my personal cell phone number. Like, This is like that kind of stuff that sucked. I have then since changed my number, so that helped. It was like I didn't even think about like a Google Voice or anything like that. I should have done something like that, but it was like getting like a text from someone at 11:30 at night because they didn't plug in their cable or something, so they're like freaking out and they're like, dude, this and this and this and this. And it was basically like fully on me. Like if something was wrong, like I would have to eat the cost of shipping to get it back or something, because we all know that shipping sucks and shipping messes up stuff. And I tell people time and time again, like if something is come dislodged, just like I pack it really tight, but there was just all these like variables. So yeah. it was for me a big learning experience. I did like my own schedule because it was like, oh, we're gonna go on a trip. I didn't have to get approval for the time off. Yeah. But there's always pros and cons to everything. So
funny how that works though, because a lot of times people will contact you. I mean, I this doesn't happen to me much anymore because I don't build rigs. I haven't really built them in any meaningful numbers for 5 or 6 years. But it's funny that once a pedal ends up on a pedal board, you now absorb the responsibility of every pedal that's on the board, because very rarely is it like, I mean, sometimes it's a cable connection or something just goes wrong, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. You know, it's just like you built everything right, and sometimes the cable fails, and it doesn't have anything to do with how you soldered it. It's cable just fails. The plug maybe wasn't, you know, crimped right at the, you know, factory, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But that's usually not what it is. It's usually like a pedal foot switch is having a failure, or a pedal is acting up, or something like that. But somehow, because you've put your hands on it, everything is now is under your role of responsibility. And I think it's interesting, you know, and it's not blaming the customer. It's just, I think it's difficult for people to separate that just because you put the pedal on the pedal board has nothing to do with you if the pedal is acting irregular.
Yeah. I actually, like, with the PBC6, I did a build for a guy, and he got the board. It was great. Everything works great. And he's like, I want to switch it out with this type of pedal. I was like, okay, yeah, go ahead. I mean, that's why there's slack under, and that's what everyone always comments. They're like, oh, these boards are so impossible to want to do that because there's no slack. The tidbit is with dual lock, I tuck like extra excess cabling underneath so you can easily swap stuff out. He didn't know that, thought he was going to have to like completely pull it apart and everything. So I was like, no, it's actually really simple. It's extra slack. So he switches out the pedal. Pedal ends up making his whole rig like ring really bad. It was like something, it was like, oh, anytime I have the timeline on and this pedal, I get this really bad ringing noise. And he's like, what did you do? I spent all this money. And I was like, and I like go down my checklist of options. And I'm like, well, what is the pedal? It's a Klon. Okay, well, do you have a timeline? Yeah. Well, did you try the grit knob setting on the timeline? Oh no, change that, like adjust that back, the ringing goes away. So there, I agree with you that there's that, like that, like things will, you know, could happen, but it's all dependent on if these pedals like each other.
This is very true, Grant. You haven't gotten a chance to weigh in on this, so I like to hear.
I'm enjoying listening to you guys chat about, you know, how you've gotten to where you are. I feel like I'm a listener. I'm Adam. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Beginning of the episode.
Adam.
Yeah. No, I mean, I absolutely love it. I think there are some days that are way too stressful, but they are few. And for the most part, I always tell people I feel so fortunate that I look forward to Monday. So I work Monday to Friday, and I love Mondays. Like, I love coming in and getting to do what I do. For the most part, I'm doing a lot more admin type stuff and thinking about the future and planning and all that these days. But even like with some of the stuff, Brian, that you were saying about getting text at like 11 at night, every once in a while, I feel like we're super blessed in the sense that we have unbelievable customers that are very understanding, gracious when we fall short of where we want to be as a company. But every once in a while, that is not the case. And there are customers that if I haven't responded to their email in 12 hours, they get very frustrated and don't understand. It's like, it's not just me, but we're a small company across multiple time zones, and we just can't hold everyone's hand for, you know, the minutes of every day that pass. And there have been, I've learned how to get better at this over the years. Still not perfect, but I'll crumble a little bit and I'll check my email at 10 o'clock at night. And sure enough, that is when there's a customer that has an issue, and I lose sleep over it. And that is the downside of running your own thing, is if I was working for another company doing what I'm doing, I'd be like, oh, that's ultimately, you know, I'll deal with it and I'll make sure they're happy, but it doesn't fall on my shoulders at the end of the day. But it does when it's Goodwood Audio. That's my company.
Yeah.
And so there are absolute downsides to having your own thing. But I've learned that 9 times out of 10, and that's not an exaggeration, it's something simple that had nothing to do with what we did. It's the grit knob on the timeline. It's, you know, the customer did this swap without telling me, and it had a, you know, a negative consequence. And oftentimes it takes a long time to figure out what happened, but I've learned, like, okay, don't stress out about it because it's probably a simple fix. And ultimately we always figure it out. we always get there. It just, I look back now after having a few more years experience of all the times I stressed out for literally no reason. I went instantly to the worst case scenario. They're going to slam us on the gear page. They're going to talk bad about us here. They're going to want a full refund. Insurance company's not going to cover the damage. Like, I go right to the worst possible scenario. And I think maybe that's happened once where a bad scenario has happened. But even then, I mean, I tell the guys on team, like, if someone calls in or emails in with a bad experience, our goal is to make them a lifelong fan by the way we treat them and handle the situation. Yeah. And I would say maybe 1% of guys leave with, like, I will never work with Goodwood Audio again if they've had a bad experience. Most of the people we can turn around and, without stressing out about it, without going down that road, we can actually, treat them like we would want to be treated. And I know you guys have probably had this as well, dealing with other big companies in the industry. You go to them with a problem and it's like, yeah, sorry, too bad. That sucks, but we're not going to help you. And I know that you guys, like, I've had to deal with you guys over the years for quite a few years now, that the customer service side is very important. And it's refreshing to be treated like a human being when you have an issue. So yeah, I've learned to not stress, I think, for the most part, and that's been really good. And now, where Goodwood Audio is at today is a very small business, but being able to do it full time, it's a dream job. And I feel so lucky to get to do what I do. And I started it as a hobby. I was doing like the Saturday only thing for quite a few years while I worked my full-time job. And now to be able to look back and see that, and be able to do this Monday to Friday and not have to, talk to anyone if I want to do a holiday or take a day off or whatever. It's pretty cool. And being able to manipulate my schedule in a way that benefits my family is, and the guys on team is really great as well. Yeah. So I love it. I absolutely love it. And I do still play guitar a little bit, but I can confidently say I've gotten much worse at guitar than better over the years. I've gotten better at doing the stuff for Goodwood. I'm a horrible guitar player now, but I still love, plucking strings every once in a while and enjoying that. So yeah, it's cool. I would say, unless you guys have anything else to add, I was curious, for some of the guys listening again, the other thing I really appreciate about you guys is that you guys aren't precious about competition. You have a view of the music industry where there's room for everybody. There's enough musicians around for us all to be able to, offer a service or a product without being precious about, like, don't talk to me about that. I don't want to give away any of my secrets or anything. Quite the opposite. And so I'm curious for those listening, and maybe at the same time, let's say to yourself 10 years ago, if you were to give some advice for those people starting out, what would it be? What would you tell someone that's at the beginning of this journey? They just realize, like, man, the modding or the tech side of the music industry is actually really exciting and interesting. What would you tell that person getting into it?
I would say I'm gonna think of what I would do. Don't be afraid to fail the first time you try to do something. Let's just be honest, because I am a perfectionist and everything. I'm very competitive. I played sports. Like, I play freaking Scrabble and I'm still competitive.
Competitive, full contact Scrabble?
Anything. Or like we do these like monthly game nights with some of our friends, and like I'm like obviously losing really bad and I'm like stressing out and whatnot, and I like I'm just competitive. So but I would say don't be afraid to fail the first couple times. You're gonna make bad cables, starting out. Don't make one cable and it be perfect and decide you're gonna just make 100 of them and sell. I'm like, take your time in learning, watch videos, do research, drop a board on the ground, like do different things like that. You kind of have to trial and error to find things out. The worst thing ever happened to me was someone told me I did something wrong and I lost a client over it because another company told me I did something wrong, and I said, I'm not mad that I lost a client. Totally on me. What did I do wrong? And they're like, your competition, I'm not going to tell you. And I was like, okay.
Small
That was
view.
shocked. I was just like, I'm not stealing your client. He was a client of mine, but he was closer to you. What happened? And they would not tell me. And I was
from
just
another.
like,
This is from another rig builder.
yeah, I'm not gonna say who it was, but
It wasn't me,
someone,
was it?
No, it was none of you guys.
Okay, thank you.
It was not you guys. I would say it was not. It was not the hammer test, Grant. I just rewatched that video and I showed it to my wife and she was dying. But yeah, so it was just like hearing that, and I was like, I will never be like that. I will never. That's why I like doing this. And I've had a couple people go, I'm really surprised you're doing this where you're giving away secrets. I'm like, I'm not really giving away secrets. We're just talking about best practices. Like, when it comes down to it, I can change the oil on my car, or I can pay someone else to go do it because I trust their experience. I can do it, but I don't want to. I don't have the time. It's the same thing with people with rigs. Anyone can do what we're doing. Some people just physically don't have the time to do it. So yeah, that was for me. It was like, accept that you're gonna fail sometimes. Learn from the mistakes. Get better. Don't text me at midnight.
Yep. That's the checklist right there.
That's the big one. I worked with one client where they texted me at midnight, and their name was very close to a girl name, and my wife's like, "Who is that?" And I was like,
Adrian.
It's a dude. It's a dude. Don't worry. Like, it's about a board build, and it was. I only give out my number for particular people, and it just was one of those things. But yeah, I would say just like accept the fact that you're gonna fail in the beginning. Nothing.
We're just trying to guess. I can just see this like unfolding. Like you guys are just about to fall asleep, and you get a text from Ariel's like, "Who's this chick talking to you about clans and tube screamers? Tell me who is she?"
That's why I was like, "No, it's a guy." But it was just like, yeah, like just accept the fact that you're gonna learn. No one's perfect in the beginning. If you are, then great, that's awesome. But like you're gonna learn. You're gonna a lot of different things to do. Take the time, and if someone asks you a question, don't be afraid to share the insight. That's the cool thing about the music community is like people like have like I text Andy Timmons. He just had his Halo delay pedal release, and he plays one song on his record where it's called "Where Words Fail." It's one of my favorite songs from him, just the melody of it, and I'm obsessed with the song. So I'm like trying to listen to it, and I text him, "Hey, how can I learn this song?" And he sent me a whole breakdown of how to play the song, which was really cool because it's the same thing with rig builders. I did a consult with Creation Music Company yesterday on some PBC programming stuff, and it was just like, oh, well, what do we owe you? I'm like, nothing. Like, this is just like, you just have questions. I'm glad I could walk you through and talk to you guys. So like, be open to sharing the experience. I mean,
cool.
You know, when it comes down to it, that's what I say.
Yeah.
So in the last couple of minutes, Mason, do you have any piece of advice that you'd give a younger you or someone starting out?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is I would say to work for somebody who has what you want. And I think that one of the biggest challenges of starting a business, which it has its challenges in and of itself, irrespective of what industry you're in. I think having a framework or a scaffold to kind of model your business after, the way that you order parts, the way that you organize things, the way that you do scheduling, the way that you do payroll, the way that you do kind of all of the means and modes of production of your business. Having an example of it that's done well is a really, really valuable thing that in some ways I wish I had worked for somebody in this capacity before I did it, because there was a lot of mistakes that I made that I think could have been circumvented had I had a good example of how it's done effectively.
Yeah.
And I think that, there's also, I think, a temptation, or at least there was for me, to try to really rush and become more established before I had really earned it. And that hurt me in the short term. In being able to grow my business and not only become better at the work that I'm doing and the products that I make, but just better as an employer, better as a company. And I think that having had some good mentoring that, where you really sort of learn how to run a business that's in this particular field is really valuable. And I wouldn't shortchange that, because that's its own sort of graduate school in and of itself, is kind of learning all those skills and learning how to do it from somebody who's really kind of proven in our industry. And I see a lot of examples, especially on the pedal builder side, where there's a lot of people that, had been mentored by, Joel from Chase Bliss by way of Zachary Vex, or there's been many spinoffs from Robert Keeley, including, Old Blood Noise Endeavors, and a lot of the people that have worked for him have gone on to do other great stuff. I think that there, Terry Burton from Strymon. I think that there's in every guy in Strymon who worked at Line 6, or, these are all people that had worked for companies that were, became very well established in whatever their particular industry was. And they developed a lot of capacity in a lot of their employees, and those employees went on to seed their own companies and take the tools that they had learned from those particular industries. So I would say that's, if I were advising myself, knowing what I know now, I know that things turned out, and it was great. But I won't lie that there was components that were a struggle.
Yeah. What about you, Grant?
I would say really simply, I think you need to learn how to enjoy going slow, and you'll find that going slow is actually going really fast. I look back very similarly to what I can now see were huge mistakes that I made, getting frustrated with them, trying to fast forward past the mistake. But I look back at my most valuable lessons, and it was not from the things that went right. The most valuable lessons are always from the things that go terribly wrong, and they accelerate change in a way that you just can't buy. So when things are going wrong, which they will if you're starting out in any area you don't know, just stop for a sec and think, all right, what can I learn? How am I going to change? And then move forward from it until it happens again. And you will accelerate your learning so much quicker if you take the time to recognize the lessons when things are falling apart around you, whether it's learning to make cables or pedals or whatever it is. I would just say, don't feel like you need to rush it. Because if you do that for 5-10 years, you will very quickly become very good at what you do. And so I feel like I'm not saying I'm excellent at what I do, but I'm learning to enjoy as much as I can when things are going wrong. And the biggest lessons are definitely there. So I know let's finish this thing up. I definitely have to say thank you guys for sharing your stories. I didn't know most of what I heard today, so it was really cool to hear that, and hopefully some of the listeners agree. And it's always cool to hear the origin stories. And if you are listening on podcasts, feel free to head over to YouTube at Vertex, the Vertex Effects channel, and you can leave comments there if you have any similar stories or questions, or what Brian's recipe is for, was it this episode we were talking about the rice and the cauliflower? I'm not sure.
That was the last episode.
Okay, well, still, if you need the recipe, Brian can post that. Our contact info as well is all over YouTube, and I believe the podcast as well. Hey, Mason.
Yeah, podcast description has all of our individual contact info. And one last thing I thought, because I was pulling up some pictures here of early rigs and stuff like that, I did find the most incriminating photo of myself here that I wanted to share just to finish things off. Okay, so here it is. So notice here,
yes,
George L. cables are present on this pedal board. This is the one and only time you'll have seen me with solderless cables. I think this was in about 2005. Just based on kind of what I see on the pedal board. I remember the RC booster had recently come out, and so that was on my pedal board. But,
and I think I can tell from looking at the photo as well that you actually aren't getting signal to the amp. So that's probably when you changed over to soldered cables.
So you can use this against me as ammunition in the future that I did at one point use solderless cables, and there's the proof.
Yep. Love it. Well, what better way to finish off the podcast than solderless cables and moving forward from there? It's all uphill from there.
Yeah.
So thank you guys so much. And unless there's anything else to say, let's sign off, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks, guys. See you next week.
See ya.
Bye.